The research and national defense facilities of the Oak Ridge Reservation are vital parts of our nation's scientific community. To continue to meet these needs, parts of the reservation require cleanup from the impacts of years of energy research. The Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board is the voice of the community, providing input to the U.S. Department of Energy on its environmental cleanup of the reservation. To learn more about this important work, you're invited to attend meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board.
Good evening and welcome to the May meeting of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. Despite what the clock on the wall says, it is 1800 hours Eastern Daylight Time or 6 o'clock. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We do have two exits each end of the building. The exit you came in, and there's one down to your right if you're sitting. Dr. Martin, good to see you. If you need assistance in exiting the building, staff or someone will be happy to help you. Just let us know. Please turn off your cell phones, your pagers, your fax machines, or any other communication device you have in the meeting, and turn it back on afterwards. Board members and public, please use the microphone when speaking so that we can hear you and adequately record your comments for posterity and television. During the presentation, we would prefer if you waited until the presenter has finished, and then when you have questions, please raise your tent so that you can be recognized. When you are done with your question, please put your tent back down. We will answer questions from the board first, and then from the public, and then back to the board if we have time. Our next meeting is going to be on June 11th, and it will be an update on the CROAT. That's an abbreviation our new students don't know about. And that's the Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee and their efforts at the East Tennessee Technology Park. Tonight's meeting will be an update on the Transuranic Waste Processing Center. Laura Wilkerson and Karen Deacon will present, and we'll get to that momentarily. We do have two new student representatives from Oak Ridge High School and Hardin Valley High School who are joining us for the first time. They will be introduced shortly by Mr. Adler. And I'd just kind of like to welcome them to the board and hope they have a rewarding experience like so many of us others do. We also have some distinguished visitors from the New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board, Site-Specific Advisory Board, if the terminology is correct. Carlos Valdez is the chairman, and Dr. Nona Giardi is one of the members who's come, and they had a tour of Oak Ridge Reservation with Mr. Adler and myself yesterday. Carlos and I have been acquainted for a number of years through the advisory boards. And we do have a new TDEC rep, which John Owsley will tell us about, and he will pronounce the name properly for us. I think I can make a shot at it, but I want to hear you're doing it. And I think that's about where we are. We'll move to the introduction of the new student representatives. I will refer to Mr. Adler at this point.
Very good. Yes, we're very happy to have two new high school representatives to the board. As Dave said, one from Oak Ridge High School and one from Hardin Valley Academy. I too am going to try to pronounce this properly, and you'll keep working on me till I do get it right. But Aditya Chowri did I get that about right? Good. Is a student at Oak Ridge High School where he's concentrating on science courses, serves as treasurer of the International Relations Club and the Model UN. He's also in charge of the high school chess club. He's a musician playing clarinet and tenor saxophone. He also serves as a school representative to the EQUAB, the city's Environmental Quality Advisory Board, which is a really good linkage for us. We'll be part of that group for the remainder of his school career. Plans to attend college after high school, but has not selected a place to go. Could we all welcome him to the board, please? And our second high school rep is Claire Rowcliffe. Claire is a student at the Hardin Valley Academy, where she's captain of the Hardin Valley swim team. She's a mentor of the Talons, a group of students that mentor incoming 8th graders. That's a very honorable thing to do. She's in the National, speaking of which, she's in the National Honor Society and is involved with Project U, a club that stands against bullying. The U stands for Unite. She is also on the girls' football team. In her free time, she likes to read and swim. She too will be going to college after high school and to study, but this time study forensic science or biology. She too is not yet settled on a school. Could we all please welcome Claire to the board? Thank you both so much for agreeing to come and work with us for a while. It's really nice of you to do that. Dave, it's okay, I'll just go ahead and launch into my...
Yeah, please do. Thank you, Mr. Adler, for the nice introductions and the welcome, and I guess comments from the Deputy Designated Federal Officer,
Okay,
et cetera, et cetera. So,
and that's me tonight, because Sue Caines is completely booked today, tomorrow, and tonight. I'm going to be limiting my comments and speaking a little softly, because I seem to be losing my voice tonight, which would your gain, my loss, yes. I think it's allergies, it's nothing serious, but I need to be careful. A few things. Perhaps the biggest news is that Mark Whitney has been selected to serve as the #2 person in Washington's EM organization. So he was the #1 person here, but now he will have the privilege of trying to ride herd over essentially the entire environmental management program across the nation. They have not yet anointed an EM1. That is a political appointee, and that will occur hopefully over the next few months. In the meantime, he will, in effect, be acting as the boss of the entire deal. Sue Caines will be acting as his replacement, pending a competition to backfill Mark's position. I think we're all very sorry to see Mark go, because he's been here for close to 2 years and has been really good for the organization, but I think we're also happy to have him in Washington. I think he will remember Oak Ridge up there, and it's probably good for Oak Ridge in the long run. So we'll just deal with the transition and see who ends up in the new positions. Also on the news front, I don't believe Sue mentioned last time, it's probably bears repeating, that we have launched another major building demolition project, the K-31 building. We've initiated tear down of it now. Out at the East Tennessee Technology Park, there were originally 5 major gaseous diffusion process buildings. Of those 5 buildings, we've now demolished all but 2. Of the remaining 2, 1 has had its contents removed, in effect. That's the 31 building. And the K-29 building still remains. So they have begun on the easier of the 2, the K-31 building, and we'll be taking the asbestos siding off of it over the next several months, and then they will demolish the building itself. Concurrent with that activity, they are preparing the K-29 building, the last of the 5 gaseous process buildings, for demolition. That building still has all of its industrial process gas equipment inside the building, so there's a lot of work that's required to get that done. The idea is to have the K-31 tear down, keep all of our workers and what they call the yellow iron, the big excavators and bulldozers and such, busy while they prepare the K-29 building. Once the K-29 building is basically the internal contents that need to be stabilized or removed have undergone such activity, they'll then move into tearing down the building itself. So we've got a lot of work lined out for us, and it's significant that we've started this other one. Completing the K-31 building will actually open up a fairly large contiguous land area at the site for future redevelopment. So that's another benefit to getting that done. Speaking of redevelopment of the site, there was a modest ceremony at the site today. Congressman Fleischman and some dignitaries from Washington came to the site to celebrate the conclusion of a transfer process for a significant land area right in the center of the site. We refer to them as EDs, stands for Economic Development Parcels, but 2 major parcels right at the center of the site have been transitioned from DOE ownership to the CROET, the Citizens Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee. What that means, and the land still looks the same, but what that means is that the land is now off of DOE's books. DOE does not have to divert some of its money to care for it, and it's on the development books. So that's a positive thing for the redevelopment of the site. It's a significant transfer in that it's about 30-plus acres of good flat land with all necessary infrastructure in place, power, roads, water, sewage, etc., so that it's ready to go for future development activities, and there already has been some expression of interest for that. It also is a significant accomplishment for us because while it's not the largest parcel of land we've ever transferred, It's one of the largest, and it also is has been one of the most challenging to transfer because unlike much of the land that we've already transferred, this was actually right at the core of the industrial part of the K-25 site. There were a lot of buildings and environmental cleanup requirements that had to take place before this land could be transferred. It also sets up a corridor of developable land all the way from the front of the site all the way back to the back of the site, which has already seen some development. So it's a good thing for the economic development. That's it for me. If there are any questions about any of that, I'd be happy to try and answer them. If not, we can keep moving.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Next is from the Environmental Protection Agency, all the way from Atlanta. Ms. Jones, if you would.
Thank you. I know Dave is feeling very bad today because K-29 has been down on the ground for quite a while. It's K-27 that will be in the series. Yeah,
Thank you.
It's a lot. You're welcome. I don't have much to provide in terms of announcements other than the ETTP project team, part of them met today and looking at the 3 exposure units comprising the K-25 footprint. So we are undertaking data quality objective meetings to see how we can best evaluate the real estate there and allow DOE to start characterization as they have committed to. There's still some processes that we need to iron out, but we are working to try to get that resolved diligently. I don't have anything else, but I'll be more than happy to attempt to answer questions if asked. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And from the Tennessee Department of Environmental and Conservation, Mr. John Owsley, all the way from Emory Valley Road.
Thank you, sir. As I noted last month, the Department of Environment and Conservation's Bureau of Environment has undergone a reorganization in part to prepare for succession planning, and I was asked if I would continue to be the board liaison for TDEC, and at the time I did not know what the final answer was, so I was a little evasive in my answer, but now I do know there will be a new liaison for TDEC beginning June. I had hoped to introduce Christoph, and it's good he's not here to correct me, Czartoryski. The Z is silent, but I think all the other letters apply. Will be attending in June. Christoph has been with the state for 20 years. He started out as an engineer working for solid waste management and has obviously progressed significantly through the management chain and is now an environmental manager 4, which is the highest manager under civil service or career staff employees with TDEC. He is responsible for the Federal Facilities Agreement, CERCLA, side of our house. We have another individual, Robert Benfield, who was selected to head up our monitoring and oversight program. But Christoph will be participating in this board in the future. And as with me, if there's any questions that you care to bring to his attention, he will do everything he can to answer those questions. Speaking of our monitoring and oversight program, we have published our 2013 environmental monitoring report. And thank you, Spencer. An electronic copy has been shared with the board staff, as well as there will be a copy as soon as bureaucracy will allow available at the website. That is the state's website for the office. And it has the results of our ambient environmental monitoring for the calendar year of 2013.
And I'll send this link around to everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Owsley. Are there any questions of Mr. Owsley? We are going to miss you, John.
Well, I appreciate that, and I've been counting, and Christoph has been with the state about 20 years. I started with this board about 17 years ago. So he's been with the state about as long as I've been with the board, so I think it's about time.
All right,
New blood is always good.
it is, thank you. Next is public comment period. Ms. Hagee?
The public comment period is now open. Roger Thompson?
Yes, I was gonna comment on something else other than this. I wanted to comment on the true. So, is now the time to do that?
Now's the time, this is public comment period now.
Oh, okay.
And then you can ask questions later.
Okay.
Please state your name and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
My name is Roger Thompson. I'm with the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, and it was the question period time that I was interested in talking to you about with the true waste and stuff. So, if yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to comment? As the Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board and committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comments section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and DOA as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 241-4583 or by visiting our website.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Presentation, tonight's presentation is on the update of the Transuranic Waste Processing Center. Mr. Hicks, would you introduce our presenters, please?
It's probably not really necessary to introduce Laura Wilkerson. She's been here several times. She's a good friend of ours. But she's also the Federal Project Director for the Environmental Management Program Office in Oak Ridge. She's had a lot of experience, more years than I think she would care to admit to, directing and managing technical programs and projects for DOE. She's responsible for a budget which is of the order of $630 million. She's been with the Oak Ridge community for a long time, and she began with the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the DOE site office as a program manager there. She's a certified contracting officer's representative. She's a good friend of ours. And she's to be assisted tonight in a manner which I'm uncertain about by Karen Deacon, who's the Deputy Federal Project Director for the Transuranic Waste Project at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Karen began her career with DOE in the early 90s, so she also has been with us for quite a considerable period. Karen has a BS degree in industrial engineering from Tennessee Tech. She moved to ORNL in 2012, where she's the Deputy Federal Project Officer for the TRU, the True Waste Project and the Sludge Processing Facility. I'm not sure who is going to go first. It is Karen. I'm sorry, it's Laura. So at this stage, I'd just like to introduce Laura and ask you to take the floor, and we'll listen to your presentation and hold our questions, please, until after you're through.
Well, thank you for your kind introduction and remarks. And make sure that I remember how to operate this. These have a pointers here. Right. All right. So just starting as usual with the map of the Oak Ridge Reservation to show you where the location of the Transuranic Waste Processing Center is directly south of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory off of Highway 95. To start, I wanted to talk a little bit about what true waste is and about our true waste inventory here in Oak Ridge so that you can get an idea of what we're doing at the Transuranic Waste Processing Center. So true waste is waste that is contaminated with man-made elements that are heavier than uranium and that have a half-life of longer than 20 years. And what that means is it has to be treated differently than a lot of other waste that we deal with here in the Oak Ridge Reservation, and it requires geologic repository disposal. It cannot be disposed of in shallow land like at the EMWMF, for example, or at the Oak Ridge Reservation landfill. So we have to send this waste to the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, which is a deep geologic repository. So the waste here in Oak Ridge, our inventory in Oak Ridge, is associated with historic research, development, and isotope production activities, a lot of which date back to the Manhattan Project time, and they took place at ORNL. And in general, the inventory primarily consists of protective clothing, tools, laboratory debris and waste, and also soils. And here are some examples of the type of waste that we process. This is basically laboratory waste. All those vials are glass vials that have been stored for a long time, and each one has to be opened and treated for liquids to meet the waste acceptance criteria at WIP. And here is a big box that contains transuranic contaminated soils and some other debris that has to be, again, processed and repackaged in WIP compliant packaging. And again, inside the glove box, some other laboratory waste here. So the mission, our primary regulatory driver for the treatment and disposal of this waste is an order from the State of Tennessee Commissioner from the Tennessee Department of Environmental Conservation to comply with the site treatment plan. And the site treatment plan has the specific requirements for treatment and disposition of the transuranic waste. So our mission is to treat and package the waste and ship it to the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. In doing that, we segregate waste that is either mixed low-level or low-level waste, and that can be packaged and disposed at a low-level waste disposal facility. So we can take credit for dispositioning of that inventory as part of the larger transuranic inventory, even though it falls out as a different type of waste. In terms of quantities, basically we have three different waste streams, four primary waste streams. The first one is supernate. We had about 1,600 cubic meters of supernate, and that processing was completed in 2004. We're currently focusing on the processing of debris or solid waste, which is composed of contact handled and remote handled. We started with 1,500 cubic meters of contact handled and about 600 cubic meters of remote handled debris. And finally, we have about 2,000 cubic meters of sludges that are associated with the processing of the liquid low-level waste system at ORNL, and those are stored in tanks and are slated for processing in the future. This is an aerial view of the Transuranic Waste Processing Center, which is the facility where we process and repackage the waste for shipment to WIP. It's within 15 acres, again, south of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. It has about 44 facilities at the site. We began operations in 2004, and the facility has operated safely since then, with almost 5 million man-hours since the last lost time incident. So that's a really great record of safety operations, particularly with the type of waste that we are dealing with, which is a hazardous type waste, probably the most hazardous in the Oak Ridge Reservation. We already talked about that. So in terms of accomplishments to date, as I said, we are focusing on processing the debris waste or the solid waste. For the contact handled waste, we started with 1,500 cubic meters. We have processed approximately 95% of that and have shipped about 68% to permanent disposal. This picture shows some of the activities for the contact handled waste processing. Contact handled waste is associated with low doses of penetrating gamma radiation, so the operators can pretty much work almost in direct contact with the waste with very small shielding, which in this case is provided by glove boxes. The primary hazard here is alpha contamination or radiation, and that's an inhalation or ingestion hazard. So that's why these operators here that have to work directly with this waste box have to wear supplied air suits. So in this case, the waste is contained inside the glove box here, and the operators are manipulating the waste through gloves. And in this case, because this is a different type of container, a big box that does not fit into the glove box like a 55-gallon drum would fit, they have to process it in an enclosure and have protective gear to be able to conduct those operations. This here is a part of the operation that we had to do in the past called the drum venting system operation, where we had to vent the drums before processing, and that was very successful. They were nested drums inside drums that had to be vented before the waste could be repackaged. For the remote handled, which is basically waste that has to be handled remotely because it's associated with higher levels of gamma penetrating radiation, so it requires remote handling and shielding for processing. We process in the hot cell primarily. We have completed 65% of processing, and 25% of that has been shipped to permanent disposal. Remote handled waste comes to the site in these large concrete casks. The majority of them have to be made it to the bottom of the hot cell to be processed. We found that a lot of those casks had actually a lot lower levels of radiation associated with them that had been originally believed, so they can be treated as contact handled waste. So our contractor WAI constructed an enclosure to be able to treat those concrete casks like contact handled waste, and be able to manipulate the waste directly because the low doses would allow for that, rather than having to use the hot cell, which requires a more cumbersome and arduous processing approach, if you will. Let's say, as part of our processing activities, we need to have the Central Characterization Project from Carlsbad be present at the site, and they're an independent body that provides characterization and certification of the waste to ensure that it meets the waste acceptance criteria for WIPP independently. So they have to be there to support our operations. In 2011, there was a suspension of the Central Characterization Project operations, and because of funding constraints DOE-wide, they had to deploy those resources to other sites that had a higher priority than our site at the time. And what we did is that we quickly reacted and took over the characterization operations and focused on, instead of going all the way through to certification and shipment, we focused on characterizing and segregating the waste, disposing of what we could dispose of as low-level and mixed low-level waste, and basically repackaging, characterizing, and staging the actual transuranic waste for when CCP or the Central Characterization Project returns, that they can pick up that activity and resume shipments in a more efficient manner, because they don't have to wait for us to process the waste. They are waiting for them. So they did return in October of this year, as they had committed to, and we have been in the process of working with them so that they can obtain the approvals from the state of New Mexico and the EPA and resume the operations at our facility. And at the time that they came, we had accumulated approximately 3,000 drums of contact handled transuranic waste ready for them to certify it and to be shipped to WIPP. And then we had in February 2 incidents at the waste isolation pilot plant, 2 operational events, one on February 5th, the second one on February 14th. The first incident, an investigation was completed and a report was released, so everybody has access to that information through the internet. It's online for anybody that may be interested, but there are a lot of corrective actions that came out of that investigation that need to be implemented. And then the second event is still under investigation, so they're still working to determine exactly what caused the contamination release and what may be required to address and prevent that in the future. So, because the second event is under investigation, the suspension of WIP operations, it's indeterminate at this time. We don't know how long WIP is going to be down. There's been, a lot of speculation and some informal things that have been discussed in the media, but there is not a formal DOE determination of how long it's going to take to resume WIP operations, because they don't know exactly what happened, so they don't know exactly what's going to be needed to be done before they can resume. So we are evaluating, we're trying to be proactive and keep abreast of what's happening and evaluating what impact, if any, that may have in our operations and our activities. Our preliminary plan is to maximize the continuing processing of our waste, because we have site treatment plans, site treatment plant milestones that we need to meet, and because we have the capability to store the material that we process for the most part. So we are continuing to process. So we're focusing on this contact handled waste and on the low dose remote handled waste casks, because we have the capacity to store that material once we process it. However, we are delaying processing of the high dose remote handled waste, because we have very limited remote handled storage capacity at the TWPC, and we have actually reached that capacity to date. So we don't have any additional capacity to continue the processing of the high dose remote handled waste. So depending on how long the suspension lasts, there may be a need for us to establish a capability to store the remote handled waste if we have to continue to do that to address the WIP suspension. So our near-term priorities are to complete the certification approval process, which I already indicated is underway, and we expect for that to hopefully happen sometime before the end of the month or in June. We are continuing to prioritize and stage the waste drums for certification by the Central Characterization Project. Begin relocating some of the contact handled inventory so that we can continue to process the contact handled waste and store it on site. And this is, an example of how we are staging the waste for certification and future shipment. This is the building one of the buildings where it's staged at. And our ultimate goal, of course, is to continue uninterrupted to complete the CH and RH debris processing. And then we also have a last waste stream that I mentioned before, and that is the remote handled sludges that are the result of historic and current, but mainly historic liquid low-level waste operations at ORNL. The majority of that waste is currently stored in Melton Valley storage tanks, which is immediately adjacent to the TWPC facility. This facility is basically an underground concrete vault that has 8 robust 55,000 gallon stainless steel tanks that are compliant and can contain the waste in a safe manner in storage. This is a high priority for the state of Tennessee, so we are focusing on making progress in that area as well. We are currently in the conceptual design stage for facility modifications that are necessary to be able to process these sludges. And we have issued a procurement solicitation to obtain the services of a design contractor to continue the design of those modifications, hopefully to final design, so that we can then get on with the processing of the sludges. So in summary, we have made really good progress in processing the contact handled and remote handled debris. We are awaiting this Central Characterization Program certification to resume the certification activities. We, as you know, are under a WIP shipment suspension, and we don't know how long that suspension is going to last. So our plans are to continue processing, focusing on processing of contact handled and low dose rate casks, so that we can continue to utilize the resources that we have and take advantage of the storage capability at ORNL to make progress towards our STP milestones. And finally, that depending on how long the shipment suspension lasts, we may have a need to establish an RH2 storage capability so that we can finalize the processing of the waste. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Laura. Excellent presentation. I guess we'll open it up for questions from the board. Does anybody have any questions of Laura? Ms. DeLong.
I was wondering, I've heard rumors here and there about TWPC coming to its end of life, and then I learned from your presentation that, you know, you have exceeded capacity on the high dose remote handled waste, and, you know, with all the issues with WIP maybe holding things up from being sent and exceeding capacity here and there. I'm wondering, is that true? Is TWPC coming to an end of life? And if so, because I heard Dirk Van Heusen was wanting to have his own waste processing facility for ORNL newly generated waste. I don't know how that impacts TWPC, but I mean, can you use the maintenance rule maybe to extend the life of?
Yeah, basically from an EM, from the Environmental Management Program standpoint, once we complete the processing and disposition of the contact handled and remote handled debris, modify the facility to process the sludges and complete the sludge processing, we're pretty much done with the facility for the time being. And the next step would be to D&D the facility. There are certainly other potential needs or potential uses for the facility by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, because they have a newly generated waste need, which is, you know, much smaller than what capability we have at the TWPC, and they're in the process of evaluating all their options, and that being one of them. So, you know, I guess, you know, it's the final decision has not been made. We are going to have a mission for several years to come until we complete the legacy inventory processing, and there is an opportunity there if the science program, you know, desires to utilize the facility, that we can work with them somehow to make that happen. But no decisions have been made on that regard.
So what schedule is the end of life for TWPC? Do you know? I mean, it's just based on when you're done with your scope.
Well, right now, let's put it this way. We had a baseline plan to complete the processing of the contact handled and remote handled debris by 2017 and disposition all of that. And then the follow-on slush program went into the mid-20s.
Okay.
And of course, because of the WIP suspension, there will likely be impacts to that will require extension.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Hatcher.
Oh, Laura, thank you for a nice presentation. My question is related to the sludge in the tanks that you have out there. Is there an intent to look at what other sites might be doing with sludge, and is there a composition that's similar here, say, to that at Hanford? And I guess the second part to that, is there a possibility that you might even be able to ship the sludge to a place like Hanford, where they're spending $12 billion on a facility dedicated to that kind of processing?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question. And we have done a lot of work working with Hanford and getting their experts and the Savannah River experts to look at what we have. We had an external technical review conducted in 2012 that was headed by headquarters, and it included technical experts from both Hanford, Savannah River, and headquarters. And we also had a very productive and interesting trip with the current TWPC contractor. Was that in 13 last year? Karen and I went out to Hanford, and we spent a couple of days talking to the ORP people and the Hanford people that deal with their tanks, and we toured the WTP and had a lot of technical discussion. And we learned a lot about how different our waste is from their waste. So that's a whole nother presentation, but it's very different, and the approach that we're pursuing is the right approach. There's currently, because it's liquid, considered liquid waste, there's not a feasible transportation option for the waste from Oak Ridge, so it has to be processed on site. But even if it could be shipped, it is so different than what they are dealing with that it wouldn't be practical to deal with it as a whole.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Dr. Bell.
Thank you, sir, Chairman.
You're welcome. Well, question and a follow-up.
A comment first and then a question.
Use the microphone, please.
Did you intentionally, or did I not hear your definition of true waste?
Can you please repeat the question?
In the past, the true waste was defined as 50 milligrams per gram of
Yeah,
true
it's
material. Is it
100
still the same?
nanocuries per gram.
That's the same thing, okay. Another question with respect to the tank waste. There's 8 of those tanks, 50,000 gallons. You're leaving about 250 cubic meters per tank. You remove the liquid and process it in the, what do you call it?
TWPC.
TWPT. The original contract in the late 90s included the removal of the sludge as remote handle in the same contract. What happened? Why was it not included? And who's going to now do it? You said we're making designs and so forth. I assume you're talking about a design to get that stuff, waste, sludge out of the tanks, which means you're going to put a lot of water in it. So you're going to wind up with a lot more supernate. What are you going to do with that? Is it going to be drawn off and sent to TWPP as well? I'm very interested in that tank sludge because I helped generate it when I was at ORNL.
So I guess your question has 2 parts, and I'll try to answer the first part first, which is what happened with this was in the original contract and it still hasn't been processed. So you are correct. The sequence in the original contract was to process the supernate and then the sludges, and it was going to be disposed of as transuranic waste. And at the time, the WIP was not ready to accept remote handled transuranic waste. So that activity was resequenced, and the debris work was prioritized first. So that, in combination with funding challenges that we have had over the years, have caused the processing of the sludges to be delayed. And that's why it's now planned to be done in the late 18s, 20s time frame, although we have a plan to resume the design activity for that in the near term. So I hope that answers your question.
Is it going to be put out for bid?
Yes, we actually have a solicitation on the street. We are procuring a design and testing only contractor, not construction, just design and testing. And this contractor is going to progress the design from conceptual to preliminary and then to final, and do the testing necessary to support that design development. And then after that, we will decide how we will procure for construction of the modifications and processing.
If I understand what you've told me is that DOE is going to design the removal process and the treatment process and then contract somebody to do that?
It's going to be a DOE direct design contractor, an architect and engineering firm that would be our design agent. And after they complete the design, we will retain their services to support the construction effort by making
They
sure.
wouldn't be the ones that would actually do the operation?
The plan is to, right now, just focus on the design. And the design contract does not include anything other than support during construction.
Does the design for removal of that waste include consideration of the British system for pumping, which was rejected by Hanford several years ago?
Are you talking about the pulse jet system?
Yes.
Yes.
That is the way to do it, I might add. And Hanford made a
I agree
serious
with that.
mistake by not putting that in. Just comment for Dr. Hatcher. The tank waste at Hanford comes directly from the fuel processing of the weapons-grade fuel neutralized with nitric acid. This waste includes everything that came out of ORNL in development of a lot of different technologies. So it's quite a bit different. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dr. Bell. Are there any other questions from the board? Seeing no questions from the board at this time, we'll open it up to the public. Are there any questions? Mr. Price, I believe you had questions?
Again, I'm Roger Thompson with the Tennessee
Thompson,
Emergency Emergency Management Agency. I just had a couple of questions. You mentioned capacity. If WIP is down for 18 months to 2 years or something like that, is there a capacity to hold the processed waste or any incoming waste? And any incoming waste is the downtime at WIP and your capacity going to delay any other projects?
I think, wow, that's a very compounded question. You may be referring to the NFS waste. Is that what you're trying to get to? Okay. So, we have, there is some waste that is at NFS that was generated as a result of work that they did in support of DOE missions. So we have served as a vehicle for that waste to be shipped to WIP. So basically what we committed to do was to receive the waste at the TWPC and certify it for shipment to WIP. We did not commit to storing that waste. So as a result of the 2011 suspension, we had to accept some waste that they had already generated or were in the process of generating to store that waste. Because of the uncertainty related to WIP right now, we felt that it was prudent to put a pause to that until we determine what the impact of the WIP suspension is going to be on our mission and our operations, because we have site treatment plant milestones that we need to meet, so that's got to be our priority. We are in the process of evaluating all of that, and as more information comes out of WIP, we will update the preliminary analysis that we are doing. But so we don't have an answer to that question right now, other than we're working closely with NFS and their headquarters sponsored to make sure that we coordinate and that we do the best we can to support them. But right now we just have to wait until we know more.
What is NFS?
Nuclear Fuel Services. Okay. It's a facility in Irwin that has.
Wait a minute, there's one more. And we have one more. A question down in the back, Laura.
My name is Andrew Kern. I had a question about the remote handled waste. You say it comes in concrete casks.
Yes, sir.
Is that all generated on site, or does that come from other places in the country?
A lot of it dates back to the Manhattan Project time. I would say the majority of it was generated at ORNL. I don't know for a fact if there may have been some waste way back in the 40s or 50s that was shipped to Oak Ridge, because at a time that was a practice. But it's waste that has been in storage for many years, for the most part, and was actually in underground or earthen covered trenches, and it was exhumed and now being transported to the TWPC for
And those
processing.
casks can't be shipped directly to ultimate disposal in New Mexico?
They cannot. They do not meet the waste acceptance criteria as is.
Are there any other questions from the public? Dr. Bell, sir.
That NFS contact caught my interest. There's no true waste at NFS. Is that right?
It is,
So how is it connected?
yeah, it's an area where they did some work for the department in years back, where they have some soils that got contaminated. I don't know all the details on it, but it is contact handled transuranic waste, and it's slated for disposal at WIP.
It is true waste?
Yeah, yes.
I mean, they never.
Anyone else? Laura, thank you again for excellent
Thank you.
presentation and
Thank
handling
you all.
this wild crowd. Did a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Executive Committee did not meet this month. We were in the midst of travels. Some of us went to the chairs meeting in Hanford, Washington. Dr. Hatcher, Bruce Hicks, myself, Ms. Staley, and Ms. Cook, and Carlos Valdez was there also. We had a very, very entertaining and eye-opening, and just a lot of good information was passed. So if you'll indulge me, I'll give you a little briefing on what went down. First thing we did when we got there is we took a tour of the Hanford site, which is pretty massive when you compare it to Oak Ridge. You know, we look at our tanks, our sludge, and we know we've got our, what, 10, 15,000 gallon tanks. They've got something well over 100 million or 1.6 million gallon tanks. They have a massive tank farm that's just unbelievable. They have the river protection, and they also have the Hanford site. They draw down a lot of the EM environmental funds, and I can see why. So I've kind of backed off on my, I guess, maybe not so good outlook as why Hanford gets more than we do. I can see why, and it's well worth the expense out there. What they're doing, the size of the tanks, what they have to do, how they're going about it, the processing plants that they are developing and constructing there are just massive and monumental. After that tour, that was enough. I went back to the room shaking and just overwhelmed. But the next morning, we got to meet David Borak, who is the new designated federal officer. He has replaced Kate Alexander. And what I've seen of him and my feeling, he's going to be one heck of a good leader for us. He just presented himself very well, very entertaining gentleman, and kind of likes what the boards are doing. Jack Craig, the acting associate deputy secretary, assistant secretary, briefed us on the various cleanup operations going around at the 8 sites, what was going on, how the dollars were being spent, what the budget was looking like for 15. As I said, looking forward at the fiscal year 15, there was an 800-pound gorilla in the room, and the gorilla's name was WHIP. With their little incidents there, that really has put kind of a holdup on a lot of cleanup. I know New Mexico is held up by it. They have a contingency plan. We're held up by it. We just heard about that today. We don't really have a contingency plan yet. And WHIP does not have a contingency plan for any failures of their operations. That is something that will be discussed at a later date. Mr. Craig also gave us a very comprehensive breakdown of the $5.622 billion budget by state, by facility. And one of the things he did, it was he concluded with a charge to the 8 chairs and boards. And this was identify community expectations with reduced funding. Broaden community participation in the EM SSAB membership and meetings. I did notice a large contingent of people at our meeting tonight, and I was very glad to see that, and I hope it continues. But that was one of the items. We were also charged with coming up with innovative methods or innovative ways of attracting new people to our meetings. Nevada site said they put up a billboard which attracted a lot of people. We do our advertising. Some of the folks came in today, saw the meeting announcement in the paper. So it's kind of up to us and the outreach committee to get more people involved. And we're gonna need to be keeping the community current on what's going on, why it's going on, and what's happening. Frank Marcinowski, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Waste Management, gave us an update on what was going on at WIP. And at the time he gave it, which was on Tuesday, Wednesday, nobody really knew. By Friday, the report was released. There's still talk of what's happening. Is it kitty litter or is it not kitty litter? Where did it come from? Some people may or may not know. But that's one of the problems. Some of the word is we're looking at WIP being closed for a year, closed for 18 months, closed for 2 years. All of this, I say, it'll come to fruition. We'll get some answers here in the next 9 months, maybe, guesstimating. Cross-complex issues were discussed. Some of the things that we have all have in common is community involvement, membership, budgeting, groundwater, and that was brought up. There are 2 recommendations that are going to be coming out of the meeting. Matter of fact, they're here. We did not bring them before the board tonight. They will be coming to us next month, and they are on. Let's see if I remember what they were. Bob, do you want to say anything about the 2? I've kind of forgotten what they were.
I got my summary also.
Yeah, but I've got so much going on here, I've forgotten what they are. Okay, I got it. The first recommendation we discussed was brought up at the Portsmouth Chairs meeting by our own Mr. Hicks, and that was selling the EM success stories. Let the public know that we're having success, we're cleaning up, and we're turning these things back into viable parks, industrial parks, recreational parks, greenways, and show the citizens of the country that they are getting a bang for their buck. It's not just going into a deep hole or a concrete cask. The second recommendation promoted by Hanford was a heavy financial burden imposed by delays. What they want to do, and we're going to recommend that we keep funding all of this cleanup at a adequate or higher than adequate level in order to get it done, because the longer we delay the cleanup, the more it's going to cost us in hotel costs, inflationary costs, and losing of workforce. Right now, we're losing a lot of the people that worked around the Oak Ridge Reservation and know where the skeletons are buried and what's in certain areas. We want the DOE nationwide to keep continuing as hard as they can on the funding. And there were no, nobody got upset at each other. It was one of the most harmonious chairs meetings I've ever been to. And I think we accomplished a good bit. And our next meeting for the Budget and Process Committee is going to be on May 28th at 5:30, followed by the Executive Committee at 6 o'clock. And that will be right here in this room. Are there any questions? Thank you. And we had no additions to the agenda. Are there any comments from anybody on the board? Seeing none, the May meeting of the Oak Ridge Site Specific Advisory Board is adjourned.
The Oak Ridge Reservation holds an important place in our nation's history, and it continues to play a vital role in national defense and modern scientific and computational research. But decades of work on the reservation dating back to World War II have left some parts of the reservation contaminated with radioactive or other hazardous waste. It's the job of the U.S. Department of Energy to clean up those residual hazards. DOE relies on citizen input on those cleanup operations. The Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board is the primary source of advice and recommendations to DOE on its environmental management program. The board offers advice on a wide range of activities, from safe, secure disposal of radioactive waste to long-term stewardship of areas with waste left in place. Be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. Call us for more information or visit our website.